You're standing in the palace of Ramses. The year is 1247 BC, and the pharaoh is dying, surrounded not by generals or priests, but by women. 100 of them, some weeping, some pregnant, some barely old enough to speak, but all belonging to one man, Ramses the Great. Egypt called him a god, but the truth, hidden in burial scrolls and bone-choked tombs, tells a different story of obsession, control, and a kingdom turned into a breeding ground. What do you do with a man who fathered over 100 children and treated each one like a stepping stone to immortality? They called him the eternal pharaoh, the man who defeated time, the god who refused to die. Ramses II didn't just rule Egypt, he consumed it. He ascended the throne at 24. When most men were buried beneath the sands, Ramses was only beginning. He ruled for 66 years, longer than any pharaoh before or after, long enough for statues to be carved, temples to be built, and sons to die waiting for a crown they would never wear. The people worshipped him not just as a king, but as a living deity. Uzama Tresetepenre, the justice of Ra, chosen of Ra. A man whose heartbeat was said to echo with the sun god's own rhythm. His colossal image loomed across Egypt, at Abu Simbel, in Karnak, in Luxor, towering even over the gods themselves. But gods were meant to die, and Ramses didn't. His courtiers aged and withered, his architects died building his monuments, his generals fell in foreign wars, and his sons, all those sons, marched into middle age under the shadow of a father who outlived them all. Only a few whispered the truth, that what had once been divine was becoming unnatural. His fourth son, Kaimwaset, Egypt's greatest scholar-priest, once restored tombs in the Valley of the Kings to honor the dead. He died before his father, buried not in glory, but in quiet tragedy. He wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. Even in death, Ramses refused to decay. His mummified face, discovered centuries later, still bore the fierce scowl of a man who dared challenge mortality itself. High cheekbones, full lips, eyes closed but not at peace. Egypt had gotten its wish, a god-king eternal. But now the throne groaned under the weight of his eternity, and the palace corridors echoed not with joy, but exhaustion. And as we step deeper into Ramses' empire, one question hisses beneath the golden facade. How many women did it take to feed a man who thought he was a god? Ramses was no ordinary palace. It was a fortress of flesh, a labyrinth of locked doors, jeweled veils, and soft footsteps that led to nowhere. Behind its sacred walls lived hundreds of women. Some were daughters of foreign kings. Others were peasants, selected for their hips, their skin, their fertility. Some were barely older than children, and all of them belonged to one man. Ramses the Great did not build a harem. He built an empire within an empire, one where women were currency, inheritance, and sacrifice. His first great wife, Nefertari, was a queen worthy of legend. Her tomb is a cathedral of color in the Valley of the Queens, a rare honor for a royal woman. The hieroglyphs speak of divine love, but what they don't say is why she died so young. Some scholars whisper she bore too many children, too quickly, her body torn apart by the pressure to produce heirs. She disappears from the records not long after Ramses' rise. No death record, no ceremony, just silence. After Nefertari came Isetnofret, then Mathorneferure, a princess of the Hittite Empire, married off after the bloody war at Kadesh. The ink on the peace treaty had barely dried when she was sent, alone, into the lion's den. A teenage virgin meant to soothe the pharaoh's ego. They said it was diplomacy, but it was something else entirely. Ramses married his own daughters, a fact so taboo that later scribes tried to scrub it from the walls. Bintanath, his eldest, appears in carvings wearing the title Great Royal Wife, a role reserved for queens. not children. Was it ritual? Was it necessity? Or was it the delusion of a man who saw his bloodline as sacred scripture and all others as unworthy? Inside the harem, competition was ruthless. Women starved themselves to remain desirable. Some poisoned rivals, others were poisoned by midwives under secret orders. When a new favorite emerged, the rest simply vanished. Their names weren't recorded, their bodies weren't embalmed. They were never meant to be remembered. In Ramses' world, women existed for one reason: to serve the dynasty, with their beauty, their blood, and their wombs. And still, it wasn't enough. Because the deeper you look into his harem, the more you realize the true queen of Egypt was not Nefertari. It was Ramses himself. And every other soul in the palace lived only to worship him. Ramses didn't father children. He manufactured them. His virility wasn't private. It was a national institution, publicly sculpted in stone, whispered about in court, and enforced inside gilded chambers where love was irrelevant. His harem was more than lust. It was a fertility factory, timed, orchestrated, and weaponized. Each child was a declaration. Each womb was a tool, and Ramses wielded them all. He fathered over 100 children, that we know of. More likely, many died nameless, miscarried in silence, or perished in ritual infancy. One mural at the Ramesseum lists 52 sons, but the artist left the wall unfinished, as if even the chisel couldn't keep up. Prince Amunherkepeshef, Prince Pareherwenemef, Prince Meriatum. Sons granted titles and roles, but not futures. They were rotated like ceremonial tokens. Generals one year, priests the next. Raised to echo their father, never to replace him. Even his daughters were not safe. Ramses crowned Bintanath, his daughter, as great royal wife. Not symbolic, but literal. Reliefs depict her standing beside him in queenly dress. She disappears from records shortly after her elevation. Some believe Ramses married Meritamen, another daughter, and possibly Nebetawi as well. The justification? Blood was sacred, and the pharaoh's blood was divine. Keeping it pure meant folding the family tree back onto itself. Inside the harem palace, sex was ritual, not romance. Priests charted conception dates based on star alignments. Women were washed in oils, positioned on sacred linens, anointed with fertility incense, all while astrologers waited outside, timing the act to match the lunar calendar. Ramses didn't bed his wives. He consecrated them. One preserved document, likely from a royal midwife's ledger, lists an instance of 11 separate conceptions in a single lunar cycle, orchestrated across multiple concubines. Each attempt timed precisely, to align with festivals and royal jubilees. A production schedule for children. And if a woman failed to conceive, she was sent to the lower harem, no longer favored, no longer touched, sometimes reassigned as a wet nurse for another queen's child. A humiliating demotion. Other times simply discarded. One minor wife, believed to be of Mitanni origin, is referenced only once in surviving scrolls. Her final note? Expelled following 6 failed cycles. No burial, no mention after. Just a biological failure in a divine machine. It's also whispered, never proven, that some pregnancies weren't voluntary. Harem politics were brutal. Women drugged rivals with lotus tinctures, bribed guards for private visits, and some, perhaps, were forced by priests acting under the pharaoh's orders to complete rituals he no longer had time for. And all of this, every chamber, every child, every act, served one purpose: to trap death in a loop of creation. Because Ramses wasn't just trying to outlive his enemies, he was trying to breed eternity, and every body he used was just another offering. Nefertari was called, she for whom the sun shines. And then the sun set. She disappears from records after Ramses' 24th regnal year. No tomb inscriptions after that, no final rites, no cause of death. One of the most beloved queens in Egyptian history, vanished like a grain of sand swallowed by the desert. Some say she died from childbirth. Others believe she was pushed aside, replaced by younger flesh, more fertile bodies. Her final years are a mystery, which in Ramses' court meant something had gone terribly wrong. Isetnofret, the second great royal wife, received more honors, but even she fades into the backdrop after her children. Particularly Kaimwaset rose in influence, as though her value as queen expired once her womb had. Then there were the nameless ones, concubines who died in childbirth, foreign princesses who miscarried on arrival, daughters who were never meant to live past their father's lust. We don't know their names, but we know their bones, scattered remains in minor tombs, hastily buried, unembalmed, stripped of royal jewelry. One body, found near Pi Ramesses, bore signs of repeated pregnancy and pelvic trauma. Yet no mention in court scrolls, no statue, no offering. And then there was Bintanath, daughter, consort, queen. She appears in reliefs at Abu Simbel, standing beside Ramses, wearing the crown of a royal wife. She ruled the harem for decades. A daughter, elevated to bedmate. The official records say nothing, but the titles don't lie. Her lineage ends there. No children, no heirs, just inscriptions carved in stone. Her body lost to time. Some believe she ended her own life. Others whisper she was buried alive after Ramses' death, entombed with his secrets like a living curse. Because in the palace of the pharaoh, love was irrelevant. Only usefulness mattered. And once a woman gave her last child, her last blood, her last breath, Ramses gave her something too: oblivion. By the time Ramses turned 80, most of Egypt had forgotten what life was like without him. Generations had come and gone under his gaze. Courtiers served him, buried their sons and died in turn, replaced by their grandsons, who bowed just the same. And still, Ramses reigned. But immortality has a price. One by one, his sons began to die. Amun-Herkhepeshef, the warrior prince, died young. Kayamwaset, the scholar, died after spending a lifetime restoring the dead. Paraherwenemef, Sethekepshef, Ramesses B. Names carved in stone, now dust. Ramses outlived at least 12 of them, and he kept having more. Each time one fell, another was promoted. Each time a new prince was chosen, he aged into irrelevance, while Ramses carried on, untouched. The line of succession became a funeral march, and in the shadows of the court, a terrible joke began to circulate. To be named heir by Ramses is to be sentenced to death by waiting. Eventually, only one remained. Merneptah, Ramses' 13th son, inherited the throne at nearly 60 years old. He wasn't a prince by the time he ruled. He was an old man with a ruined spine and a dying empire. His rule lasted less than a decade. By then, Egypt was no longer a superpower. The Libyans were encroaching, the sea peoples raided in waves, and inside its borders, famine whispered through the granaries. But the worst rot wasn't outside. It was at the core, in the idea that one man could outlast death by replacing everyone around him. His children weren't heirs. They were mortality shields, thrown between Ramses and the grave. And while the people sang of eternal reign, behind palace doors, the royal family prayed that their father would finally die. Ramses the Great finally died in 1213 BC. He was over 90 years old. His skin was like parchment, his jaw locked in a death grin, but his body refused to rot. The priests embalmed him with a care reserved for gods, not because they worshipped him, but because they feared what might happen if they didn't. They buried him in KV7, a tomb carved into the Valley of the Kings, large, majestic, and cursed. But even death couldn't contain him. Grave robbers came. The tomb was looted, violated, left to crumble. The priests panicked. Ramses was dug up again, smuggled through the desert and hidden among other mummies like a dangerous relic. They sealed him inside Deir el-Bahari, like a weapon, like a secret. When archaeologists finally uncovered his remains in the 19th century, they expected dust. What they found was something else. The face of a king who still looked alive. High cheekbones, tightly clenched lips, eyes that once commanded thousands, now shut but not surrendered. Even in death, Ramses had refused decay. But Egypt had. His descendants were weak, scattered, forgotten. The dynasty collapsed within a generation. The cities he built were abandoned. The gods he honored faded into obscurity. Only his image remained, staring from statues too large to move, temples too heavy to bury, tombs too proud to admit defeat. But for all his children, for all his wives, for all his desperate attempts to breed eternity, Ramses left behind nothing that loved him. Only silence, only stone. And today, in the sterile light of a museum in Cairo, you can still see him, stretched on linen, his mouth set in what some call a smile. But look closer. That's not peace. That's a man who tried to conquer death, and ended up buried alive in his own legend. They say kings are remembered by what they build. But Ramses didn't build a legacy. He built a tomb so large it swallowed his family, his kingdom, and himself.